Hi, I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of Blue Stack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. I'm very happy today to be in beautiful Bray, Ireland, with Dr. Cara Augustenborg. Hello, Cara. How are you?
Hi, Bob.
Cara is the environmental scientist and communications expert here in Ireland who lectures in environmental issues at University College Dublin and also at Trinity College Dublin. She's also chairperson of the Friends of the Earth here in Dublin. And she's an active blogger on her site Verdun Yank. The Yank suggesting to you that maybe she's an American like I am.
Yeah,
we'll find that out.
Half American.
Half American. And she conducted doctoral research at UCLA, which her PhD is from, and also at Teagasc, which is Ireland's Agricultural and Food Authority. Yeah. And that was in what years?
I moved here in 2003, so 2003 to 2007, yeah.
Okay, so you're still a blow-in.
Yes, you're always a blow-in in Ireland.
Yeah, unless you got 10 generations.
I know.
Now, I thought today, Cara, that we would talk about focusing on the agricultural sector's contribution to greenhouse gas emission, which is a critical issue here in Ireland, and also on the Irish government's policy for significantly expanding the agricultural sector at the same time it's trying to comply with its obligations under EU law to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mm-hmm. Now, first I want to ask you, what is the kind of scope of the agricultural contributions to greenhouse gas emissions here in Ireland?
Yeah, Ireland is really unique. We're one of only a few countries, I think New Zealand would be another one, where agriculture is our largest contributor to greenhouse gases. So it makes up just over 30% of our greenhouse gas contributions right now compared to transport or energy. And so it's a unique position to be in where our food production is actually contributing more than our energy in terms of climate impact.
And actually, I think EU-wide agriculture is usually about 9% contribution for greenhouse gases.
Yeah,
so there's a big difference.
Yeah.
Now, the government has introduced policies called Harvest 2020 and Food-Wise 2025. If you could explain to the audience where they came from and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, officially the government says that Food Harvest 2020 and Food-Wise 2025 aren't policies. They're more strategic visions or something. And the reason they say that is that gets them out of having to do any environmental impact assessment on them. If they were policies, they'd need a big environmental impact assessment. So Food Harvest 2020 sets a pathway of what we call sustainable intensification, which is a word I don't really like, but they've set targets for a huge volume of increase in dairy production and a significant increase in the value of the beef industry. And so those are the main targets. And so those targets, in order to achieve them, would mean a massive ramp up in agricultural productivity in the beef and dairy sectors in Ireland. And of course we know that cows contribute to greenhouse gases, so more cows means more greenhouse gases. Food-Wise 2025 doesn't actually have any targets in it, but it sort of assumes that we will continue to meet our Food Harvest 2020 targets as part of it.
Okay, and this all grew out of the lifting of the milk quotas by the EU back in 2015.
Yeah, I mean, Food Harvest 2020 came out before the milk quotas were lifted. So, but now since the milk quotas were lifted, we can keep expanding production in dairy if we want to.
Now, you were mentioned before, Matt, there's a new study by Teagasc about this whole issue of food harvest and its relationship to greenhouse gas emissions. If you tell the audience about that.
Sure. Teagasc has been doing some really interesting research over the last couple of years in land use management, because if we managed our land better, we could potentially sequester more carbon in our soils. We have very high organic content in our soils, so they're nice carbon sinks if we manage them correctly. So a paper that they just came out with is in the Journal of Land Use Management, and it actually talks about how we could manage land in Ireland better to sequester carbon. But one of the things it does say is that the Food Harvest 2020 targets are probably incompatible with our climate ambitions, and therefore we need to consider revising our Food Harvest 2020 policies in line with what we've committed to under climate legislation.
Now, that's a good segue to what is that obligation under EU law for Ireland's target for 2020?
Well,
for greenhouse gas emission reductions.
Under the 2020 agreement with the EU, we set a 20% reduction from 2005 levels. And it looks like, based on current EPA projections, we, at best, will hit 6% instead of 20%. So we're 70% off. because we've done nothing. I mean, the last time we had any kind of climate strategy in Ireland, that expired in 2012, and our government has been sitting around doing nothing since then. So we've no plan, we've no vision. We have climate legislation now, but still nothing has come out of that, nothing productive, and no action plan for how we'll achieve emissions reductions.
I saw recently, John Curtin, I think it was, estimated that the failure to meet the 2020 targets could cost the government about 610 million euros,
yes.
which is huge.
Yeah, so we'll pay big fines for that, and and if we miss our 2030, we would pay even more fines.
Yeah, now let's go to the 2030. What is Ireland's target for 2030 under the recently introduced EU plan?
Well, originally we would fall in line with what the EU commitment was under the Paris Agreement. So they had committed to a 40% reduction across the EU. So we have now gotten some wiggle room with that and knocked it back to 30%, and some creative accounting measures and what they call loopholes and concessions, so that our obligation under the 2030 legislation is lower than other countries. But to make matters worse, the EU has also set a new baseline. So instead of being based on 2005 levels or 1990 levels, they've said we will set the baseline for those reductions to 2016 to 2018. And while for most countries in Europe who will all exceed their 2020 targets and are doing pretty well on climate action, Ireland is only one of two countries that won't meet their 2020 targets. So by setting that new baseline of 2016 to 2018, what it means for us is that in the next 2 years we have no incentive to reduce emissions. In fact, we would be better off if we increase emissions, because that would make our 2030 targets easier to achieve. So it's a disaster for Ireland and for countries like Luxembourg too.
And besides, now this is the deal that recently was announced between the EU Commissioner and Ireland to get out from under just the basic 30% reduction for Ireland, right? But now also, was there also something to do with afforestation as part of that deal, that recent deal?
Yeah, so within agriculture, we've now set an agreement that we can use carbon offsetting to deal with our agricultural emissions. And, you know, maybe there is some value to using offsetting, but actually for Ireland, we don't actually have a good afforestation policy either. So in order to properly offset our agricultural emissions, we need 3 times the amount of forestry that we even have envisioned over the next decade. And you know, how many farmers are going to want to convert to forests and live in forests? And so we don't have a plan for achieving that anyway. It's a bit silly.
So the offset may just be theoretical. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's not at the scale of. I think they're saying 5%, and we won't. We need 3 times the amount of forestry to achieve that.
And I did see a recent study that said only 3% of the farmers said they had any interest whatsoever in planting woodlands.
Yeah, it's a big commitment for them, so you can see why. And they've been burned a lot by the Irish government in the past on things like bioenergy, where many farmers converted to bioenergy only to find we don't have a renewable heat tariff at the moment. And, you know, so you can see why they'd be apprehensive to convert their land into forests without long-term commitments.
And there's also part of this new kind of deal that was just struck, that they also get to take some money from the ETS fund to apply to agriculture?
Yeah, basically what they can do is shift the problem from the agricultural sector into the ETS sector. So that's not really actually reducing emissions at all. It's just moving the problem from agriculture to another sector.
Now, if they're not getting the reductions to meet the 2030 targets from agriculture, it's going to have to come from transport?
Exactly. So we've never, in the NGO sector, we've never mandated that they necessarily have to reduce from agriculture. But we have said is if they're going to increase emissions from agriculture, as they plan to under Food Harvest 2020, then they need to take the hit somewhere else. So they need to be more ambitious in transport or energy. You know, it's about the total volume of greenhouse gases that we emit, and we have to make cuts somewhere. So that makes it harder for other sectors. But in fact, other than energy, which has had some success through wind energy and stuff, I mean, transport's rapidly increasing, worse than agriculture. So agricultural emissions will probably increase about 2% between now and 2020. Transport's emissions are expected to increase up to 19% between now and 2020. So
just by 2020?
Yeah, so we're nowhere near a low carbon transition on transport, and not a single word has been uttered by the government on what transport's role is in a low carbon transition.
So there is no plan in place to get that savings in transport.
Nothing.
And that is one of the criticisms of the government is there's no transparency about it. All right, you're going to save all this agricultural product, but then where's it going to come from? Who else is going to pay for that?
Yeah. I mean, we need to have a conversation, and what they've been doing, what the government has been doing, is just kicking the can down the road on that conversation and leaving it to the next government and the next government, and it's just, as long as it's not their problem.
Okay. And you said that there was originally a national strategy plan, which doesn't exist anymore?
Yeah, so we had 5-year strategy plans on climate, and the last one expired in 2012. And so the previous government should have created a new plan, a new climate strategy, but did nothing. And in fact, what they did is they took the draft climate legislation and they revised the timelines on that so that they wouldn't have to do anything within their tenure in government. So they pushed it on to the next government. So now we have the climate legislation. It came in just before the last government ended. And so there should be a plan in place within this government. I mean, at least the climate legislation has created a legal situation where no future governments can do what the last government did. But we're still waiting. You
haven't seen too many signs of that plan at this point?
We have a climate advisory council who has committed to writing a short 20-page report in December and another one in the summer, and there should be a plan, a draft plan in place from the government in the summer of 2017. So, and legally they'd be required to produce one by then.
Now, Cara, you talked about this kind of side deal agreement that's recently been announced. Is that binding? Is that finalized, that agreement? Or
no, at the
moment
it's been proposed, and the commissioner has accepted the proposal, the energy commissioner, but it has to be voted on in Parliament. So the next 18 months will be a time of negotiation and fighting it out. So I think we'll all be very active in that fight.
But is there any hope that even if that particular form of agreement falls apart, that the Irish government will take any further aggressive action?
It's a good question. Maybe they'll be happy enough to pay fines. That's how Ireland seems to deal with a lot of their EU environmental legislation is by fines. I'm not sure what their political capital is in Europe right now. I mean, they have weird things going on with this Apple tax, and maybe they will find it harder to secure favoritism from Europe because of that. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Cara, thanks for talking with us.
Thanks so much, Bob.